9-year-old Marise Chiverella was walking a total of 6 blocks distance from home to school when she was snatched by a man. She would never be seen alive again. Everyone has different hobbies. Some involve reading, playing video games, or writing in journals, while some include doing genealogical research to solve decades-old murders. Don't judge. That's the hobby of the protagonist of today's story, who at 18 solved a 57-year-old cold case of a little girl who was strangled with her own shoelace. Details of this crime story are both horrifying and amusing, so don't go anywhere. Marise Chiverella was last seen by a neighbor walking to school on the corner of Sherman Court and West 4th Street on the morning of March 18, 1964. She took the short route from her home on Alter Street, Hazleton, to St. Joseph Memorial School on Laurel Street when she was kidnapped from the side of the road. The child's body was discovered just hours later at around 1 p.m. by 38-year-old Arthur Robinson, who had driven out to an abandoned coal stripping pit where those in the surrounding areas would often come to dump their trash. Robinson was there to discard a container of ashes when he instead made a horrific discovery: the body of innocent Marise Chiverella. Robinson described the victim as fully clothed, bound, and gagged without shoes. The reason for having no shoes is extremely grim, which we'll get to in a minute. Tins of canned food she had been taking to the church on her way to school were found with her body. He was so shocked at what he saw that he turned right around and sped home to call the police. Marise's wrists and ankles had been tied, and her own scarf was found shoved into her mouth. An autopsy later revealed that she had been sexually abused, assaulted, and later strangled to death. Can you imagine what she was strangled with? Yes, you thought right. It was her own shoelace that the killer used to murder her. An article in the Courier-Times detailed that 3 dark-colored pubic hairs were found on the victim's leg. The case became the most famous thing in Pennsylvania at the time. However, despite their best efforts, police were unable to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. Her siblings never stopped seeking justice for their slain sister. In March 2004, an article printed in the Standard Speaker of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, reported on a theory put forward by a New York resident named Harold Paddock. Paddock believed his late ex-father-in-law was responsible for Chiverella's death, as the man had committed similar murders with some common elements. Mary Teresa Simpson was snatched off the street in March of 1954, and her body was discovered some days later in the woods. She too had died of strangulation, and dirt had been shoved into her mouth, much like the scarf in the Chiverella case. Simpson was murdered in Elmira, New York, and Chiverella was killed in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, which is about 5 hours' journey in the 60s. Paddock reported his suspicions to both the FBI and Pennsylvania State Police, but nothing came of it due to the lack of evidence, and no connection was ever made. In 2009, a viable DNA sample was obtained from the Chiverella's jacket that she was wearing at the time of the murder. A DNA profile of her killer was built and entered into DNA databases on a monthly basis, in the hope that it would be matched to a future entry. In 2019, the killer's DNA profile was uploaded to GED Match, a website for genetic genealogy research, where users can upload their DNA files, analyze results, and compare DNA shared with others. Over the decades, more than 250 members of the Pennsylvania State Police worked the Chiverella case, amassing over 4,700 pages in the police file, but they never came up with a single arrest. Marise's parents, Carmen and Mary, died without knowing who had killed their jump rope-loving, organ-playing little girl who aspired to be a nun, but the other family members did end up getting justice. About 2 years ago, a Pennsylvania State Police decided to try and solve the case with the help of a kid. The kid, who is the hero of our story, was just an 18-year-old college freshman, Eric Schubert, who did genealogical research as a hobby, mostly helping people draw their family trees and working with law enforcement to search for suspects. Schubert had read online in the local newspaper about the police's efforts to find Marise's killer, so he reached out to offer his services. Schubert stated, "I just figured I'd send them an email and say I'd love to help if I'm not stepping on any toes because I like to think I know what I'm doing. And he really did. However, before he got to work with the state police, he had to be vetted first. Investigators set up a meeting at a coffee shop on campus. Schubert made a big impression on the officers from the start, his drink order. When they offered him coffee, Schubert said, "Oh, I don't drink coffee. I'll take an apple juice." The officers thought, this kid's going to drink apple juice here and he wants to help us solve a homicide? But after listening to what Schubert had to say, the officers were surprised and thought the kid was on point. They took him on board, but only after Schubert bombarded them with text, calls, and emails. He was really determined to work the case that had gone cold for more than half a century. Schubert spent as many as 20 hours a week for 18 months researching every possible lead. Composite sketches of what the perpetrator may have looked like at the time of the crime and over the years were also generated through phenotyping prediction. It was predicted that Ciavarella's killer had hazel eyes, fair skin, and dark hair, and was of Southern European or Middle Eastern roots. The images were circulated locally as well as online. However, nobody recognized the man in the composite sketch. That's because he didn't exist. Not anymore. Finally, after almost 2 years of hard work, Schubert zeroed in on a local bartender named James Forte, who had a criminal record but was never considered a suspect. Forte died of natural causes in 1980 at the age of 38. The killer's picture was taken from the school yearbook. Forte was never married and did not have any children, so to get his DNA, Forte's body was the only choice. The lead was compelling enough for a judge to grant the exhumation of his body. Yes, they decided to dig up his grave. A DNA sample removed from the same jacket Marise wore the day she died was a positive match to Forte's on February 3, 2022. Schubert was so confident that he stated, "I think the odds of the DNA not being his were 1 in something septillion, so that's 24 zeros. What a guy, right?" Police said Forte, who was 22 at the time of Ciavarella's murder, had no known connection to the little girl or her family. He was never on their radar, but had been arrested for other violent crimes in the 1970s. In 1974, Forte pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and was sentenced to a year of probation. He had sexually assaulted a woman in 1974 in an area used for coal mining. And in a recent interview, she told the police that she thought she would have been killed during the attack if not for a person who saw what was happening and stopped it. In 1978, Forte was charged with reckless endangering another person and harassment. The police said they did not have any further details on that case. Pennsylvania State Police announced Ciavarella's killer in a press conference with current and retired investigators, alongside the girl's 4 living siblings and extended family members. Schubert was also praised for his amazing work. The family also received some type of closure, even if it was 57 years later. At the conference, Marise and Ciavarella's siblings called her a sweet and shy 9-year-old who was learning to play the organ and aspired to be a nun. This is the oldest cold case file that has ever been solved in Pennsylvania state history. What James Forte did to this little angel is irreversible, but I think there's some closure in knowing that he's no longer alive and out there doing this to other girls. Do you think the advancements in technology will result in a solution of more cold cases? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and also share it with your friends. Do check out some of our other videos, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for your regular dose of whodunits. See you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and don't get any crazy ideas.